Okay, so, I guess this is going to have to be in like 2 or 3 parts, because I have a lot to say, about the coronavirus situation. Now, I am not discounting the idea that this is indeed a contagion that is very serious and potentially deadly for anybody that catches it, but particularly the young and the old and those with pre-existing conditions. I absolutely believe that that is the case. I have doubts about germ theory, and I have major doubts about the idea of viruses in particular, which is funny because when I first went to college, before I switched majors eventually, I wanted to become an epidemiologist with a focus on virology, or really I wanted to become a virologist, functioning in the capacity of an epidemiologist. But anyway, I was obsessed with viruses, particularly filoviruses such as Ebola and any hemorrhagic fever. So I don't say any of this lightly, but yeah, there's major doubts about the existence of viruses, and you guys can look into more of that on your own. But one thing that has been inserted into the narrative about coronavirus is the idea that it was spliced with HIV as some type of bioweapon. Now, first, I want to ask you guys, what kind of bioweapon would HIV amount to? Even if HIV wasn't complete bullshit, which it is, and I'll get to that. But even if we believe what we're told about HIV, it is barely contagious. You have to sleep with an infected person 900 times on average to contract it once. And even without medication, it takes, upwards of a decade to kill, or more. And with medications, allegedly, it can take decades. Now, I've seen a lot of people running with this because it supports their idea that this was a bioengineered virus, intentionally released or something like that. And nobody's thinking, like, what would HIV contribute? It doesn't, it's so slow acting that it wouldn't have any initial effect whatsoever. But beyond that, the fact is, HIV has barely ever been isolated. There's no proof that it causes any illness whatsoever. And it's pretty much been debunked as the cause of AIDS for anybody that's willing to look. We've had Nobel Prize winners that have come out with books called The HIV Hoax. Kerry Mullins, he was the one he developed this test that was eventually used improperly in the diagnostics of the HIV test. And he has been speaking out for years and years and years against this whole thing, to the point where he's called the entire thing a hoax because the test is a hoax. The test is absolutely bogus. It is quantitative rather than qualitative. So, to put that in layman's terms, it measures how much HIV you have rather than whether you have it or not. Now, that's kind of misleading because really it measures how many of these proteins and antibodies are present in your sample, and based on non-standardized cutoff points that are different across different labs and different countries, that determines whether or not you have HIV. But they also use information you provide about yourself to determine the results of your test and whether or not you're deemed to have HIV. So whether you use needles or ever have used IV drugs, whether or not you're a hemophiliac, whether or not you're gay, things like that, which, even according to germ theory, as dubious as it might be, should have absolutely nothing to do with the results of a test, as to whether you do or do not have a pathogen. Anyway, the documentary House of Numbers is available for free on YouTube. It completely dispels the entire myth of HIV causing AIDS. We already know that AIDS, like for instance, when it first broke, when we first started hearing about this this disease that is affecting, like it was affecting gay males mainly in San Francisco. It was called GRID. And one of the primary manifestations of it was Kaposi's sarcoma. It's like a face cancer, basically. And that particular cancer had been long known to be caused by amyl nitrate, which is the drug poppers, but it was originally used to treat, I believe, either like heart disease or some type, or some type of respiratory dysfunction. And that was like, I don't know, a century ago that they established that it caused Kaposi's sarcoma. And then, what do you know? When the gay guys started using it as a sex drug to relax certain muscles, smooth muscle tissue, they started contracting Kaposi's sarcoma. It was like the first time people had seen it in a long time, because these drugs had fallen out of favor because of the Kaposi's sarcoma they caused. Anyway, if you think about it too, how come no women ever have to worry about getting Kaposi's sarcoma? You've never heard of that, right? Just gay guys, just fast track gay guys, usually in San Francisco, who have had, lots of sex partners and partake in this high risk behavior. AIDS is actually the result of a completely destroyed immune system, which typically is destroyed by really bad lifestyle choices, like having over 1,000 sex partners per year and engaging in receptive anal sex, which is terrible for you. Your rectum has no immune system. Nothing was ever supposed to go in there. So it's really bad for you to practice receptive anal sex, especially with 1,000+ people a year. And a lot of these guys were also using, they were taking antibiotics at the bathhouses like they were like candy offered in, a waiting room dish. Literally before they'd go in, they'd reach into this dish of antibiotics, different antibiotics, thinking that they could be used prophylactically to prevent them contracting the various STDs they were guaranteed to contract in the bathhouse. Another thing that was very destructive to the immune system of this community of gay people is the fact that they were using industrial lubricant. And they were literally like inserting like hoses into their rectums full of this industrial lubricant, to make the horrible self-destructive sexual behavior they're about to engage in a little bit easier and less painful. That should be a hint that maybe you shouldn't be doing it, right? Anyway, also IV drug users, particularly those who don't use clean needles and are not using sterilized, water, things like that, using, like, say, tap water to dissolve their whatever drugs they're injecting. Anything like that where you're constantly injecting foreign substances into your body, causes you to have an elevated antibody response. And as a result, you're going to be more likely to test positive for HIV, because all the HIV test does is measure different antibodies that are non-specific to HIV infection. Now, pregnant women, particularly those who have had more than one pregnancy, are like 70% more likely to test false positive on these tests. Pregnant women should never take the HIV test, because I think in a lot of states, maybe all, if you test positive on this test, you don't have the ability to decide whether your child is going to be put on these horrible chemotherapy drugs that you're lucky if it doesn't cause a miscarriage. I would highly advise against taking HIV tests while pregnant, and I've never done it. I took the test years ago when it was offered to me, when I didn't know any better. But since I found out about these things, I think I did take the test my first pregnancy. Thank God it didn't test positive. Because you can have your child taken away if you decide not to put them on these poisons. Anyway, sorry, I have so much to say. It's really hard to keep my thoughts straight. There's just so much. But I'm seeing this circulated everywhere now. Even good channels that were providing good information are running with this crap because nobody's thinking. The fact that HIV medications are treating this illness in Thailand doesn't mean anything. Those are antivirals, particularly antiretrovirals. I know at least the coronavirus is an RNA virus, so it's not at all surprising that they would respond to HIV medications. But HIV medications are just like chemotherapy. They just destroy cells. So if that is a pathogen or your immune cells, doesn't matter. They destroy everything in sight. And it doesn't surprise me at all that they are effective. They just haven't really ever been used, I'm sure. It's very rare that they ever use HIV meds to treat viral infections like this. They're most of the time, if you get a viral infection, they'll tell you there's little to nothing that you can take. Besides, sometimes they'll give you antibiotics for no really good reason at all, just to try to prevent or treat some secondary opportunistic infection, of a bacterial sort. But yeah, I'm just pretty discouraged that people are so. I think it's just that. Anybody that wants to run with the idea that this was a bioweapon, this is a bioengineered virus, which, look, it might be, but anybody that wants to run with that, even if they've heard about how dubious the whole idea of HIV is, they want to run with the idea because it backs up their preconceived notion. It backs up their pet theory. So, I don't have much respect for those people. And, I really do think this was intentionally inserted into the narrative to discredit it. Yeah, I have to run into the store before it closes, so this is going to be part 1. And as soon as I get out, I'm going to record a second and maybe a third part to this. This is pretty important, and I have some very personal information to share. So anyway, keep a lookout for that. Thanks, guys.